Good. Okay. All right then. So, first of all, so my name's Shaun O'Dwyer. I'm a lecturer at Kyushu University in Japan, and yeah, I've been co-convener of Heterodox East Asia with Joseph Yeast for well since we started up in 2022. So, okay, I'll just start the share screen option, and no, I won't. Just a moment. Okay. All right, so this presentation, sorry, it's going to be a little bit formal and academic compared to Peter's, so my apologies for that. This presentation is based on an investigative article I wrote for Diplomat magazine um, about the Princeton University Press's, shall we say, misadventures on a Potemkin tour of Xinjiang and why it happened and also what the implications of this tour are. So rather than talking about the suppression of religious or speech or academic freedoms in China, I'm talking more about the subversion or undermining of those freedoms on a transnational basis and how that operates through the subversion of I guess, the intentions of institutions such as universities and university presses and how they can be suborned or how they can be twisted and manipulated into delivering a pro-authoritarian or a liberal message which supports the agendas of authoritarian governments, including the current government in the People's Republic of China. So I'm kind of basing this to some extent on a book recently published by Alexander Cooley and Alexander Djukalskis called Dictating the Agenda. And this book more or less argues that authoritarian states don't always just try and protect their own turf from outside influence, that it's not just a matter of them suppressing speech freedoms and imprisoning their own people when they sort of speak out against the government or they engage in dissent, that where they can, they will try and impose their own agenda abroad because, of course, citizens of their countries do go abroad. They do pick up information from abroad, they bring it home, and that causes trouble. Or information comes from abroad via news media, via NGOs, via travelers, which also sows dissent in their societies. So where they can, not just today, but in the past, where they can, they will try and impose or insinuate their own political agendas, their own political ideas abroad, and try and control the narrative of how they're represented in foreign media or in other foreign institutions. Relating to Peter's discussion just before, one example is the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church has an institutional footprint in China, had for quite a long time, and it has had to negotiate with the People's Republic of China government in how it presents itself. And has been leaned on to control or to how do I say, to not to promote anti-government messaging through its churches in China. But my case will be to discuss academic publishers, in particular Princeton University Press. And just before I continue, Princeton University Press is not a part of Princeton University. It's an independent non-profit organization. So this again is taken from Dictating the Agenda book, and it just shows a scale of how authoritarian regimes try and control the narrative about themselves, how they try and control information, which goes from the more domestic circumstances of repressing dissent in their own societies, stigmatizing dissenters, shielding them, and then trying to control how outside information comes in by trying to control foreign NGOs or to shut them down entirely, and then gradually to try and project control and influence outwards, and finally to try and dictate the agenda of how they're represented in countries overseas, which is, of course, highly ambitious. And often, of course, it's likely to fail or not likely to succeed completely. Now, how is this done? So, how do they try and set this agenda or control the agenda of how they're represented and how they're discussed in foreign countries? Well, the thing to understand, of course, is how the whole sort of transnational liberal ideals are gradually being subverted. So the idea that we live in a globalized society and ideally there should be free exchange of ideas, free movements of people, free movements of capital, labor, and so on across borders. And these ideas have tended to be combined. So on the one hand, you have a kind of transnational cultural liberalism, which universities and other institutions, including academic and commercial book presses, participate in, which is that ideally there should be across national borders free exchange and transmissions of ideas, creeds and beliefs, and arts. And of course, this is part of what globalization means. And this, of course, presumes kind of more or less explicitly that there should be human rights to liberty and free expression, because otherwise there can't be any such free exchange of ideas, creeds, and arts. So to work, this does kind of presume there has to be some sort of recognition of human rights, such as liberty and freedom of speech. On the other hand, there's also transnational market liberalism, which is that, ideally there should be barrier and tariff-free international movement of economic goods, labor, capital, and knowledge. And this, of course, presumes that there is a functioning rule of law and property rights to protect the interests of institutions which are invested in these kinds of movements. Now, universities are an interesting case because they tend to sort of mash these two ideals together in a way which is sometimes kind of, it's not clear which way they're really inclining. Are they really inclining just to make money from having lots of foreign students, for example, from China, and sometimes not giving them very good education and response? Or are they really genuinely committed to the free exchange of intellectual ideals, of cultivating students who are have not just got a credential, of course, but who have deeply learned what they study at university and who have engaged in society, which they are studying in when they're studying abroad. Uh, Now, the problem here as well is that they can be leveraged against. So universities or book publishers, for example, universities can have a lot of their revenue depending upon foreign students coming from an authoritarian country. And the government in that country can use that as leverage to try and compel universities, sometimes very subtly, sometimes not so subtly, to control what kind of information gets to those students, or perhaps not to really act as much as they should to protect those students' academic freedoms if they are interfered with from their home country. And so, as it were, the sort of transnational illiberal influence can wedge between the cultural liberal dimension and the market liberal dimension, using the financial economic dependence of foreign institutions such as universities to try and get a message through, or to try and exert some sort of control over those institutions so that they're not so forthright or so strong in defending academic freedoms. So this brings me to the case of Princeton University Press. Princeton University Press is a transnational institution. It has a footprint for its publishing, for the dissemination and marketing of its books in many different countries, including in China. So it was the first American university press to open an office in China in 2017. And it works together with a government-controlled book importer to market and sell its books there. And in terms of cultural liberalism, so its ambitions are very good. Its ambition, as it says in its promotional statement about its investment in China, is to selectively publish exemplary Chinese scholarship and to make it available globally in translation. So it recognizes that China should be internationally recognized for its scholarship and research, and works to collaborate with Chinese researchers and translators to publish and translate Chinese research abroad. But also, Princeton University Press has financial interests as well. So even though it's an NPO, it is a very, very well-funded one. So it has tens of millions of dollars in revenue, lots of staff, very highly paid executives as well. So perhaps I shouldn't disclose too much of that information, but they are very highly paid. Princeton University Press has involved itself in partnerships with other publishers to help with to assist with their marketing in China. So Chicago University Press, but also W. Norton, which is one of the most commercially successful and prestigious of commercial book presses in the United States. So just this year, it signed a partnership with W. Norton to market its books in China. So, what was the problem that arose this year with a Xinjiang tour? Well, and I'll just make sure I can see what I'm reading here. Uh, Princeton University Press has as I said, has a long-term relationship with a government-controlled organization called the China National Publications Import and Export Group. So all foreign book publishers have to have some kind of relationship with government-controlled book import organizations, such as the CNPIEC. So in this case, Princeton University's Press's partner is this book import group. CNPIEC also hosts a very prestigious book award, a book fair, sorry, I'll say that again, hosts a very prestigious book fair where lots of publishers from inside China or from abroad will go to promote and market their books. So that's hosted every year in June 2025. At the book fair, the director of Princeton University Press, Christy Henry, was invited by CNPIEC to participate in a cultural tour of Xinjiang, along with the 2025 recipients of the Special Book Award of China Prize, which is also awarded during the book fair. So she, two of her staffers, and I think 13 translators, researchers, and language teachers from countries such as Iran, Nepal, Italy, and Turkey also joined this tour. Now, the tour was co-sponsored by two organizations, by the CNPIEC and also by the Publicity Department of the Autonomous Region Party Committee in Xinjiang, which is, to put it bluntly, a propaganda organ of the Xinjiang regional government. So I'll just bring up the Chinese language People's Daily here. So it's just so for those of you who read Chinese. So this is the title of the tour, and here the name of the Xinjiang publicity organization and also the CNPIEC are mentioned as the co-sponsors of this tour. Okay, so just drag that down. So in late June 2025, Christie accompanied the other tour, and her staff has accompanied the other tour participants in cultural tourist excursions in the cities of Ramchi and Kashgar in Xinjiang. Part of the tour was to meet and talk with Xinjiang authors, translators, and publishers. So there was a genuine intellectual or academic side to the tour. However, on the 26th of June, Xinjiang Regional Government News Organization Tianxinet released a video of Christy Henry praising Xinjiang's cultural harmony. This sparked an uproar amongst the Uyghur minority diaspora, amongst human rights organizations and scholars researching the Uyghur people. So this footage was released on Twitter and caused a huge stir. So I'll just play the video. And okay, I have to adjust the sound. Oh, come on.
I can't wait to help tell this story to the rest of the world, particularly to the English-speaking world. The ability for multiple cultures and multiple languages to coexist in such a wonderful, magical way is a story that will help the rest of the world learn how to live and how to live in peace rather than war. So I hope to use this experience to make sure this story makes its way to the United States, to England, and the rest of the world in English language. It's a joy to learn, and I want to be able to share this experience with everyone the world over.
Okay, so as the story goes, this was not a good look. So the reaction was that she was whitewashing crimes against humanity in Xinjiang, and that she was parroting state propaganda language about telling the Xinjiang story for a new era to the world. Uh, and that she was doing this in a region where a lot of people have been incarcerated, persecuted, including leading Uyghur intellectuals. So on the 28th of June, Princeton University Press issued a press release as an exercise in damage control, justifying Christie's participation in the tour. Now, I won't go into too much detail, but I've just provided an excerpt of the press release here. But there are 3 points to raise. One, when she and her staffers accepted the invitation of the tour, they knew, or as she says, they were cognizant of the region's ongoing. Oh, damn, sorry, I'll just bring that up again. Hang on. They were cognizant of the region's ongoing human rights atrocities. So they knew what was going on, what has been going on for the past 8 to 9 years in Xinjiang. Two, they knew that it was to be a curated tour, that they would not have complete freedom to go where they wanted to go to, that they would be taken or they would be shown around to areas based on the judgment of their handlers. And three, they realized soon afterwards that the tour footage that was taken had been repurposed and miscontextualized in ways that undermined their intentions of inclusive cross-cultural interactions. So they knew that they had, in a way, been manipulated or fooled. So why does this Xinjiang tour matter? Well, Christie was inveigled or controlled in becoming a mouthpiece for state propaganda. So this, again, for the Chinese readers, the title more or less says it here. This is about telling the Xinjiang story for a new era. So more or less telling the narrative of what the Chinese government believes is or the correct way of saying or explaining what is happening in Xinjiang, which is that it is kind of like a paradise for multicultural life and exchange. And this in a region where, according to the United States Holocaust Museum, there is a reasonable basis to believe the Chinese government is committing crimes against humanity against the Uyghurs, at least since 2017. Secondly, many Uyghur intellectuals, including scholars such as Rahil Dawood and Ilham Tohti, whose works are candidates for translation and publication by Princeton University's Press's China Princeton book series, have been persecuted and incarcerated. And at the time of speaking, both Dawood and Tohti are serving prison sentences. I think, at least in Tohti's case, it's a life sentence. The tour also raises questions about a possible clientelist relationship between PUP and its book importer collaborator, CNPIEC, which controls its access to the China book market and potentially censors its publications in China. Now, what do I mean by clientelist? Well, it's kind of like where you're in a relationship with someone who has quite a lot of power over you, and you, by bestowing benefits and favor on you, you feel obliged to give something back to them, to do what they want you to do. So in this case, PUP has from its import organization partner been permitted access to the China book market. And also CNPIEC is in a position to bestow benefits on it, to invite its members to the Beijing Book Fair, to bestow prizes on them. So in return for this, I think it's quite difficult for its executives to say no, even to potentially manipulative or compromising engagements such as the Xinjiang tour. Other academic book presses operating in China, such as Springer and Taylor and Francis, have also faced censorship imposed by the government-controlled book importer partners. So it's not just Princeton University Press. Other book presses have also faced censorship issues. finally, and this is not something that is quite, how do I say? Um, well, I have to say it's kind of a rumor, not something that's confirmed. Uh, Perry Link, a very famous sinologist in the United States, had a book, a proposal accepted by Princeton University Press before 2017, which is when Princeton University Press signed its agreement with to begin marketing its books in China. And Link, the book proposal was about the persecuted Chinese poet and Nobel Prize winner Liu Xiaobo. So this book was co-written with a Chinese dissident. Princeton University Press accepted the book proposal and gave Link and his co-writer a $25,000 cash advance. So they sent drafts of successive chapters to to Princeton University Press. It was peer reviewed. One of the peer reviewers' reports were very, very negative and demanded very extensive rewrites, saying that the book was not well conceived, needed to be shortened, and so on. Link and his co-writer tried as much as they could to respond to the peer reviewers' requests and submitted a draft which had been revised. Princeton University Press rejected the book, but allowed Link and his co-writer to keep their cash advance. Not long afterwards, Columbia University Press accepted the book, or actually they solicited it, accepted it, paid a much larger cash advance to Link and his co-writer, and the book was published to wide critics' acclaim. Link expressed to me a suspicion that perhaps the peer review process had been biased by the Princeton University Press's commercial interests in China. When I contacted Christy Henry, the director of Princeton University Press, and put to her this allegation, she denied it emphatically, and she said that in no way are our book selection and acquisitions process influenced by political factors. So this is just how things stand. Perhaps the moral to derive from the situation is that Princeton University Press has not helped its reputation by allowing itself to be manipulated into something like this Xinjiang tour, and that this did awaken Link's suspicions that there was some kind of political influence in how his book manuscript was treated by Princeton University Press. So I'm not going to give my own opinion whether I think it was manipulated or not, but that's just how things stood after I inquired with both Link and Christy Henry about this situation with his book manuscript.
Okay.
Okay. And do I
Great.
have time? Do I still have time?
I think you're out of time, Shaun. And also,
Okay, all right.
I gave your publications to the students and audience, so they read your publication on this. Can we move to Q&A?
Yep, sure.
Or actually, can you just wrap it up with a final word?
Well, more or less what I said in that article, that I do believe in academic exchange with Chinese scholars, with publishers working in China. I'm doing my best to facilitate that and continue with it. Again, I think against increasing odds, but I think there is a point where we have to draw a line and pull back for our own sake and for the sake of our Chinese collaborators and publishers when they are put at risk. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I wanted to say.
Okay, great. Thank you, Professor O'Dwyer. Now let's open it up for a Q&A. Okay, Q&A from the students, from the audience. Yes, can you come up? Okay, and please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Megan. I'm from the US. I was born in Florida. I was kind of questioning about something you said kind of before you started talking about China. You mentioned like some universities who might receive a lot of money from foreign students might be able to kind of be coerced by foreign governments, I think is what you were saying. I was wondering if you had any specific examples of China or otherwise. I know in the US we've had like growing concerns about China kind of being involved in universities, like the Confucian Institutes were shut down at some point because of those kinds of concerns. And I wasn't sure if you had any like specific examples of universities or countries who are particularly influenced by China or other authoritarian countries.
University of Queensland in Australia, so I'm Australian myself. The This is going back 6 years now. The Vice Chancellor of University of Queensland, Peter Hodge, was a voluntary member of the supervising organization for Confucius Institutes in China. And the consul of the Chinese, the consul of the Chinese Consulate General in Brisbane, where University of Queensland is located, he was also an honorary lecturer at the University of Queensland at that time. So as a result, I think of Peter Hodge's patronage. Uh, in 2019, a young man that I know who was a student at that time, Drew Pavlou, who's quite famous now as an influencer on YouTube and Twitter, he staged a demonstration against the Confucius Institute, and hundreds of people turned up to counter-protest, including Chinese students, but including some outsiders who did not look like Chinese students. He and some others were assaulted. Their sound equipment was thrown around and snatched from them, and there was a great deal of intimidation directed against them. The next day, or I think 2 days later, the Consulate General released the Consulate General of the People's Republic of China in Brisbane released a message, public message, praising the patriotic action of the Chinese students and others who protested against Drew, and I think eventually accusing Drew Pavlou of encouraging splitism. So that subsequently Pavlou was subjected to some, because of his activism, which followed on from that, fairly sometimes quite provocative activism, but legal activism. The university undertook a series of punitive measures against him, including up to expelling him for his activism for one semester, I think. I think he was able to overturn that on appeal. So there were big questions about how much Peter Hodge's investment or his connection with the Confucian Institute's organization influenced his actions in trying to control and eventually to suppress Pavlou's activism and the activism of people who are against the Confucius Institutes on his university. And University of Queensland depends for a great deal of its revenue on Chinese students, fee-paying Chinese students.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? I had a question from Anonymous. Professor O'Dyer's talk is very informative and interesting. However, given the huge overrepresentation of Democrats versus Republicans among professors, cultural and political repression.
Sorry, can you read that more loudly, please? I couldn't pick it up.
Oh, sorry about that. It's on the chat mode. Can you just click on the chat?
Okay.
Okay. So I'm just reading out.
Sorry, everyone, that I wasn't able to display the video. I'm using a Mac for the first time, and it just seems to configure Zoom rather differently to the sort of laptop that I'm used to. But anyway, yeah, go on.
Right. So basically, the Anonymous is saying that so culture and political repression is also arguably evident due to excessive woke ideology in American universities. It is not only the CCCP that tries to assert its organizational power. What Christie says has an element of truth. That area of China is indeed relatively multicultural in several ways, such as language, social norms, and food. The fact that African Americans are overrepresented in U.S. prisons doesn't mean that all African Americans are being subjected to crimes against humanity. Okay, so I think the Anonymous is making two arguments. One is that, in a way, this was also mentioned by Daniel Bell, that China has, kind of formal top-down censorship, but Western countries have censorship too, but it's more like informal, more social, but they're both highly restrictive. What do you think about that? And number two, African Americans, yes, like he's making a comparison that many African Americans are incarcerated, but doesn't mean that they're all like feel oppressed. And so, can you draw a parallel that yes, thousands of Xinjiang Uyghurs are incarcerated, but do you think conditions are better overall for the vast majority of Uyghurs living in Xinjiang?
Okay, just replying to the first question. I'm what I would like to call an equal opportunity offender when it comes to left or right wing commentators or bloviators or general all-round trolls on Twitter and other social media platforms, which means I've irritated both right-wingers and left-wingers, including so-called woke academics. Perhaps my willingness, well, I won't say that my willingness to say things that offend them stems from the fact that I live in Japan and teach at a university in Japan, and the Japan is pretty good with speech and academic freedoms. And so when people get very angry and cranky with me and try and cancel me from the United States, it's not going to work. So yes, I'm aware of the really quite foolish and self-defeating illiberalism of left-wing or so-called progressive academics and student activists in the United States who kind of ran amok for a while on social media and caused a lot of trouble and did try and cancel a lot of people. But I think that has to be seen in proportion. In the end, they didn't really have so much power. And now we're seeing a very, very severe backlash against them. I think we're seeing how not particularly powerful they were. I also have to say that I have a great deal of contempt for the far right in the United States, which complained and protested about cancel culture and academic and speech freedoms, and now is busily trying to cancel them, and not just by internet mobbing and bullying like the so-called woke academic and student organizations did, but by using the power of government, the power of the federal government to crack down on dissent. So I think that's a disastrous development, and the people who were once advocating for academic freedom and now are becoming the instruments for that crackdown under the Trump government, they're absolute hypocrites. So yeah, I don't really rate much of what they have to say about academic freedom either. Going on to the second point about trying to draw parity between the incarceration of larger numbers, particularly of African American men in the American penal system, and what's going on in Xinjiang, I think that's an apples and oranges comparison. I think there are a lot of structural factors contributing to the criminalization of young men, including poverty, including, I guess, the development of a certain kind of, I don't know how to say it, a oppositional youth culture amongst some subcultures in the United States, which inclines to criminality. And I think there are a lot of arguments about how that can be dealt with. In Xinjiang, and I'm just going by the United States Holocaust Museum's assessment and assessments by many scholars and human rights organizations, this is a very different scale of and a different kind of problem, where the government is criminalizing a minority population in its entirety, subjecting them to a carceral surveillance state system in which hundreds of thousands of people have been subjected to arbitrary incarceration and to imprisonment, at least in the early years of the crackdown in Xinjiang, to forced labor, involuntary forced labor, to forced assimilation, to the destruction of their religious sites, of mosques, of pilgrimage sites, of sacred sites, to the active suppression of any expression of religious belief, which is seen to be against the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. And which didn't actually start in 2017. I mean, there have been waves of repression inflicted by the Chinese Communist Party on minorities in the past, including going back to the Cultural Revolution. And there have been periods where Uyghur intellectuals have been subjected to arbitrary imprisonment and persecution well before the crackdown started in 2017. So as I said, this is an apples and oranges comparison.
Shaun, but just to play the devil's advocate, this is echoes to the colonial modernization theory here in Korea. Would you say that at least economically, like the average person the average Uyghur person, their lives has improved during Chinese rule? So yes, the politically active, they have lost their political freedom, but for the regular person on the street who's not politically active, they have more life opportunities. Can both things be true? There's political oppression, but also more economic opportunity.
It's certainly been an up and down case. I mean, if you go back to the late Qing dynasty through to the period of Republican and then communist rule, There have been periods of neglect, of colonial style neglect, of halting efforts and sometimes repressive efforts at cultural assimilation. During the Cultural Revolution, I guess, well, sorry, under the Communist Party, there was a Minzu policy, of course, which based, I guess, on a kind of Leninist idea of trying to suppress what Mao called Great Han chauvinism, tried to show some respect to minorities' rights and their cultural practices. Again, this is subject to arbitrary reversals and to repressions. And yes, perhaps since 1989, you could say, yes, that there has been a general kind of improvement in incomes. And sorry, I'll say it again, since the 1980s. Since the 1980s and the opening up of China, there has been a general uplift of people's incomes, their economies, and so on across China, and even including extending to minorities, including in Tibet or in Xinjiang. But I would have to say that the average Uyghur person's ability to profess their faith, in spite of all these economic improvements, their ability to profess their faith has been severely restricted, at the very least, even if they're not outspoken politically or religiously. That they have had their culture and lifestyles, their language impacted by the latest round of repression since 2017.
Thank you, Shaun. Is there any other comment or question from the audience or from my students? Okay. Yes, Alex, I see your hand. Go ahead, Alex, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Shaun. I second very much what you said also in response to the previous questions. I would like to maybe ask you to elaborate on what you see as Princeton University Press's mission. I do believe it is quite disgraceful, this story about this, this participation in what you described as a Potemkin tour, and then the subsequent declarations about unity, harmony in Xinjiang. But in terms of what they're trying to do, are they focused on publishing work from scholars based in China, or is it much broader than that? Because if they are focused on publishing work by scholars based in China, then there will be a built-in censorship, political censorship, in virtue just of the geographic location of these people. So then PUP cannot be fairly blamed, I guess, for exercising censorship. The censorship will start from a much lower level. However, what you suggested with Perry links suggests that maybe the mission is broader. So they're also supposed to publish work about China, which could be offered in the United States, any part of the world, by respected scholars. And in that case, then the censorship factor does become more relevant, because these people may not face the sort of pressures that China-based scholars are facing. So how do you exactly understand the scope of their mission?
Okay, so Princeton University Press has a dedicated China Princeton book series, which acquires, peer reviews, and publishes books relating to China, both by Chinese scholars and by scholars abroad, and by Chinese scholars living abroad. And it has wider sort of book series which also publish about China. So it has published books which are critical of the Chinese government. There's a couple of books that's published about the repression in Xinjiang, and one of those books was cited in the press release on the June the 28th, where Princeton University Press tried to justify its participation in the tour, and more or less they sort of was like waving their hands saying, look, we do publish books which are critical about what's going on in Xinjiang. And this provoked a very angry response from the author. And he said, more or less, how dare you use my book to try and justify your actions in this tour? So I think there are a couple of problems that come up. I think that the biggest problem is that they are obliged to self-censor when in this, for example, their digital storefront in China and in their distribution of books in China, there are going to be books which their partner, CNPIEC, the book importer, will say, no, you can't. You will not release this book in China. and they have no choice. I can't give any examples of titles. I can tell you that this has happened to Taylor and Francis and to Springer, that their book importer partner has said to them, you're not going to publish these, or we're not going to allow you to market these academic journals or these books here. And they've had very little comeback against that, because if they say no, they can be blocked. They can be told to withdraw, pull out of China. So at the very least, they are vulnerable to censorship pressure, and they have inducements to self-censor. Now, as for whether their book acquisitions processes are biased by this investment, I really don't think there's enough information to make a definite, conclusive statement about that. There are rumors and claims, and there were Perry Link's accusations as well. But as I said, it's very difficult to make a definitive sort of connection between this book manuscript was rejected and there are political processes going on which bias the book selection process against that. I don't think we're in a position really to say that yet.
I see. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, and Alex and Shaun. Any other question and comment? If not, I had a final question for Shaun. In your publication, you mentioned your thesis of fighting retreat, that publishers need to call out the Chinese government publicly. If they don't, they need to get out of China, get out of the Chinese market. I'm wondering if you can make an argument that like people like the Uyghurs, they need more Western engagement, not less. And Max Weber says politics is a hard, boring of wars. That if you want to promote like freedom and democracy in China, Western, publishers and other organizations need to be engaged in China for the long haul. And number two, that we can make more change with like more kind of like negotiations under the table, informally, privately, as opposed to calling them out publicly. This is an argument that that people like Daniel Bell makes, right? That a lot of things in China are done bureaucratically, privately. So you need to kind of like learn how to like work kind of follow these informal rules. What do you say to that, Shaun?
Absolutely committed to it. In fact, I've just joined the what's it called? The advisory board, editorial board for a new book series with Taylor and Francis with Routledge. It's called Global Voices, and this book series is going to acquire and translate books from other languages, including Chinese, which would not otherwise reach an Anglophone, an English-reading audience. So I am committed to the idea of commissioning titles from China, including by minority authors, and also from Japan and Korea, and having them translated and having them published. So yes, of course. The point is, what's the red line going to be where we say this action by our partner institutions in China or by the Chinese government authorities absolutely crosses our red lines? So I can give a couple of examples. Authors who are going to be having their work translated and published are intimidated or threatened or arrested. 1. 2, staff at the publication organization based in China, which is helping with the acquisitions process, are threatened, intimidated, detained, and arrested. 3, overt threats to not publish or to scupper the publication of a book whose authors are located in China. I think those 3 kinds of what I would call line crossings will be grounds for bailing out, for getting out. And the reason is that where people's liberties are at threat, there is no room for negotiation. You get out rather than continue with actions which put them in danger. So I think where our commitment comes up against this level of threat, where our partners are facing detention or arrest, or where our continued engagement puts those people at very severe risk of such detention and incarceration it's time to get out.
Okay, that's the final word. Thank you very much. Thank you to Shaun and all the audience members for participation. Okay, thank you. Shaun,
you.
so it's fine with putting this on YouTube, right? You're good to
Yeah,
go?
yeah, fine. Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much. You're welcome to go. Okay, all right. If anybody if anyone wants to talk to Shaun privately, you can do so now. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.